Manhattan's glass towers stretch endlessly into the November sky, their lights reflecting the ambitions of millions who believe success could be measured in quarterly reports and corner offices. Victoria Sterling embodied that belief perfectly, commanding a billion-dollar empire from the 42nd floor of Sterling Industries with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony orchestra. Yet sitting alone in her corner office at 11:15 on another 18-hour workday, she felt more like a prisoner than a powerful CEO. Her phone buzzed incessantly with updates about the IPO that would either establish her as the youngest woman to take a major corporation public or destroy everything she'd spent 7 years building. Revenue projections scrolled across three monitors, while her assistant's voice cut through the haze of caffeine and adrenaline that had sustained her through another week of 3-hour sleep cycles and protein bar meals. The Hartwell acquisition needs your signature, came the crisp announcement that punctuated her isolation. Success, it seemed, was a profoundly lonely achievement. Across the city, Marcus Cross sat in his worn Toyota Camry, counting crumpled bills with methodical precision. $36 in tips from 12 hours of driving strangers through Manhattan traffic, enough for Emma's asthma medication and groceries if he shopped with military campaign strategy. Marcus had traded his medical career for rideshare driving, measuring success not in corporate victories, but in small survival moments. Making rent, keeping his 6-year-old daughter healthy, maintaining the delicate balance of single parenthood that required constant optimization. His EMT certification lay buried beneath unpaid bills and photographs of his late wife Claire, whose cancer battle had lasted exactly 6 devastating weeks from diagnosis to funeral. The grief that followed had been so profound that Marcus sometimes forgot life required active participation rather than passive endurance. Emma kept him grounded, her needs providing structure when everything felt meaningless, her laughter proving that joy could still exist in the wreckage of loss. His rideshare app pinged, a pickup from the financial district, the kind of fare that usually meant good tips from people who attended charity galas and didn't worry about emergency medical costs. Victoria stepped onto wet pavement outside the Metropolitan Museum's charity gala, honoring corporate leadership in healthcare innovation, her Louboutin heels clicking as she fled an event celebrating her for revolutionizing medical technology while systematically destroying her own health. The irony was sharp, creating breakthrough cardiac monitoring systems while subsisting on 3 hours of sleep and forgetting regular meals. The seafood appetizer had tasted wrong from the first bite, metallic, sharp, dangerous in ways that triggered subconscious alarm bells. Now her throat was closing, breath coming in shallow gasps as she stumbled into the alley between buildings, searching for air that seemed to evaporate before reaching her lungs. Marcus pulled to the curb just as Victoria collapsed against a dumpster, her Valentino evening gown torn and dirty, makeup streaking down her face in patterns suggesting tears, rain, and genuine terror. "Please," she gasped, practically falling toward his vehicle. "Can't breathe. Allergic reaction. Restaurant. Someone help me." Marcus was out of his car before conscious thought intervened. Dormant EMT training surging back with muscle memory that 2 years of driving strangers couldn't erase. He caught her as she fell, immediately assessing the situation with clinical precision that felt both foreign and familiar. Her lips showed the blue tinge of cyanosis. No EpiPen visible, no medical alert bracelet, just a woman whose body was shutting down from anaphylactic shock, progressing with terrifying speed. "I'm calling 911, Marcus said, phone already out. But her grip on his wrist was surprisingly strong for someone struggling to breathe. "Too slow," she wheezed, each word monumental effort. "Need air now, please." His hands moved automatically, muscle memory overriding years of self-doubt. Tilting her head back, checking her airway, positioning himself for artificial respiration that could maintain oxygen flow until paramedics arrived with professional equipment. The first breath was purely clinical, mouth-to-mouth contact focused entirely on survival rather than intimacy. Air from his lungs to hers, watching her chest rise to confirm effective delivery. The second breath came easier, her airways responding slightly, showing less resistance than the first attempt. By the third respiratory assist, she was breathing more independently, the crisis plateauing rather than escalating toward fatal conclusion. Her eyes fluttered open after that third breath, unfocused but aware, looking at him with an expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and something else he couldn't identify. "Ambulance is coming," Marcus assured her, pulling back to give her space despite adrenaline flooding his system. "Just keep breathing slow and steady. You're going to be fine." "Do it again," she whispered, her voice rough but surprisingly clear. Marcus stared, genuinely confused. "The respiratory support? You're breathing normally now. The worst of the reaction seems over." "Not the breathing," she said, and despite everything she'd endured, she was smiling. "The kiss." "Do it again." Heat flooded Marcus's face as professional detachment crumbled under the realization that his emergency care was being reinterpreted as something completely different. "That wasn't a kiss, ma'am. That was CPR. Artificial respiration. Life-saving procedure." "Felt like a kiss to me," she replied, breathing stabilizing but still labored. "Best one I've ever had, actually. Saved my life and made my heart race for entirely different reasons." Sirens announced the ambulance's arrival before Marcus could formulate a response to that completely inappropriate but oddly charming statement. Paramedics took over with professional efficiency, asking rapid-fire questions about reaction timeline and interventions performed. Marcus gave clear, concise answers, his EMT background evident in precise medical terminology and systematic patient assessment approach. Only as they loaded her into the ambulance did Marcus get a clear look at her face, recognition clicking like puzzle pieces falling into place. Victoria Sterling, the billionaire CEO whose innovations had revolutionized cardiac care, whose face graced magazine covers and financial news segments, whose company was preparing for the most anticipated IPO in recent memory. "Thank you," she said as paramedics secured her on the gurney. "You saved my life. I'd like to properly thank you when I'm not dying." She directed a paramedic to give Marcus her business card. Elegant cardstock with embossed lettering that probably cost more than Marcus earned weekly. As the ambulance pulled away, Marcus stood alone on rain-soaked streets holding a billionaire's contact information, wondering whether that entire encounter had been real or some stress-induced hallucination brought on by too many nights driving strangers while Emma slept safely in their modest apartment. That sleepless night, Marcus researched Victoria Sterling online. Business magazines praised her innovative leadership. Financial websites analyzed her company's projected IPO valuation. But buried deep in medical journals from 2 years ago, Marcus found something that made his hands tremble. An article about experimental cardiac procedures performed by Dr. Marcus Cross, former surgical resident whose promising medical career had ended abruptly under circumstances the article diplomatically described as personal tragedy. The rising star surgeon who'd vanished from medicine completely was now driving rideshare for $36 in daily tips. 3 days passed before Marcus summoned courage to dial Victoria Sterling's number. He'd rehearsed leaving a brief voicemail expressing hope for her continued recovery, then hanging up with obligation fulfilled. "Mr. Cross," a crisp voice answered immediately, catching him off guard. "Ms. Sterling has been expecting your call. Please hold while I transfer you directly." Before Marcus could protest that he'd rather just leave a message, Victoria's voice came through the line, warm and genuinely amused in ways that didn't match her corporate image or formal headshots he'd seen online. "I was starting to think you weren't going to call," she said without preamble. That you decided one dramatic rescue was enough human interaction for the week. I wasn't sure you actually wanted to hear from a rideshare driver, Marcus admitted, standing in his small kitchen while Emma watched Saturday cartoons in the adjacent room. Thought maybe you were delirious from the allergic reaction and wouldn't remember giving me your card. I remember everything, Victoria assured him with surprising emphasis, including you refusing to kiss me again when I asked very nicely, despite having just performed the most romantic mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in medical history. That was emergency care, Marcus protested, face heating despite being alone. Not romantic anything. There's a significant clinical difference. If you say so, Victoria replied, clearly enjoying his discomfort. Regardless of medical terminology, you saved my life using skills that seemed remarkably advanced for someone whose day job involves driving strangers around Manhattan. I'd like to properly thank you over dinner. My treat, obviously. I promise not to have any life-threatening allergic reactions during the meal. Marcus knew he should decline, should maintain appropriate boundaries between his world and hers, should recognize that accepting dinner invitations from billionaires was probably catastrophically unwise. But something about her voice, about the way she looked at him in that back seat, about the possibility of genuine connection with someone who saw him as more than just a service provider, made him hear himself agreeing before rational caution could intervene. The restaurant was exactly as expensive and intimidating as Marcus had anticipated, the kind of establishment where his nicest clothes appeared shabby compared to other patrons, where menu prices made him mentally calculate how many hours of driving each dish represented. Victoria arrived looking completely transformed from the woman he'd rescued, polished and elegant in a designer dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent. But her smile when she spotted him was genuine rather than performative. Thank you for coming, she said, gesturing for him to sit. I know this probably feels awkward, but I genuinely wanted to express my gratitude properly. Anyone would have done the same thing, Marcus replied, uncomfortable with praise for actions that had been purely instinctive rather than heroically planned. Actually, no, Victoria corrected firmly. Most people would have driven away from someone stumbling out of an alley looking like I did that night. Would have assumed I was intoxicated or high or someone else's responsibility. You stopped without hesitation. You performed emergency care that kept me alive until professional help arrived. That deserves significantly more than a generic thank you. Over dinner that Marcus barely tasted due to nervousness about proper etiquette and correct fork usage, Victoria studied him with growing curiosity. Your medical knowledge was quite extensive for a rideshare driver, she observed. The paramedics mentioned that your assessment and response were textbook perfect, almost like you'd performed emergency procedures before. Marcus felt his chest tighten. His medical background was buried for very good reasons. I was an EMT years ago, he said carefully, before Emma was born. Haven't used those skills in a long time. The half-truth felt heavy on his tongue, but the complete story wasn't something he was ready to share with anyone, especially someone whose life seemed so perfectly assembled. Victoria explained what had happened that night, a food allergy she'd developed recently, a restaurant's failure to properly label shellfish ingredients, a reaction that had hit with frightening speed while she was attempting to leave through a side entrance to avoid persistent paparazzi. The terrifying part, she admitted, was realizing I'd left my EpiPen in my other purse because it didn't match my outfit. Rookie mistake for someone with potentially fatal allergies. I could have died because I prioritized fashion over basic survival preparation. But you didn't die, Marcus pointed out. You're here, completely recovered, eating food that presumably won't trigger another allergic reaction. Because of you, Victoria said, her gaze direct and intense in ways that made Marcus's pulse quicken. Because you recognized a medical emergency and responded with exactly the right intervention at exactly the right moment. That's not coincidence, Marcus. That's someone with real training and experience. The conversation flowed more naturally after that, Victoria asking about his life with genuine interest, rather than polite small talk. Marcus found himself discussing Emma, single parenthood, rideshare driving, and the careful financial planning that made their modest existence barely sustainable. She listened like his struggles actually mattered, like his daily challenges were fascinating rather than simply different from her wealthy lifestyle. As dinner concluded, Victoria made a request that was simultaneously simple and completely life-altering. "I'd like to see you again," she said, "not as obligation or gratitude, but because I genuinely enjoyed talking with you tonight. Would that be acceptable?" Marcus should have declined, should have recognized that their different worlds were fundamentally incompatible, should have protected himself and Emma from complications they couldn't afford. But looking at Victoria's hopeful expression, remembering how she'd looked at him like he was worth knowing rather than just serving, he found himself agreeing despite every logical reason to walk away. Over the following weeks, Victoria became an integral part of Marcus and Emma's daily routine. She appeared at their apartment with takeout dinners, joined them at playgrounds where Emma demonstrated her mastery of monkey bars, attended school events where 6-year-olds performed songs that were objectively terrible but subjectively perfect. Emma adored Victoria immediately with the uncomplicated enthusiasm children show when adults genuinely pay attention to their thoughts and feelings. She dragged Victoria around their small apartment to display her artwork, demanded her opinion on playground politics, included her in bedtime routines with the casual assumption that naturally this nice lady would want to hear detailed accounts of first-grade social dynamics. "She really likes you," Marcus observed one evening after Emma had finally fallen asleep, stating something obvious because he didn't know how to articulate the more complicated feelings developing between them. "I adore her," Victoria replied. "She's brilliant and funny and completely authentic in ways adults forget how to be." "You're doing an extraordinary job raising her alone, Marcus." "Most days I feel like I'm barely maintaining control," Marcus admitted. "Like one unexpected expense or missed shift could bring this entire fragile structure crashing down around us." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing her words with deliberate care. What if it didn't have to be quite so precarious? What if you had additional support, resources that made daily life more stable rather than constantly stressful? "I can't accept your money," Marcus said immediately, defensive instincts rising like walls around his pride. "I appreciate the generous thought, but I need to provide for Emma myself. Taking handouts, even from someone I care about, feels fundamentally wrong." But their peaceful routine shattered when paparazzi photos surfaced across social media and tabloid websites. "Billionaire's new charity case?" screamed the headlines, accompanied by images of them at Emma's school and local playground. The coverage was merciless, portraying Marcus as a gold-digging opportunist, exploiting Victoria's gratitude for financial gain. The media attention was overwhelming and intrusive, exactly the kind of chaos Marcus had feared from the beginning. Emma faced playground taunts about her famous new mommy, while classmates' parents whispered about their family's sudden notoriety. "We need to stop this," Marcus said after a particularly brutal week of constant photographers and cruel online commentary. "I should distance myself, protect Emma from the circus. Our lives were peaceful before I complicated them by getting involved with someone from your world." "Emma asked me yesterday if you were planning to leave," Victoria replied quietly. "Not because of the media attention, but because she's learned through experience that people often leave when situations become difficult. I told her you were different, that you stayed committed even when things got complicated." "Was I wrong about that assessment?" "You weren't wrong," Marcus assured her. "I'm not leaving because photographers are annoying or tabloids are cruel, but I won't subject Emma to this level of scrutiny indefinitely." Just as they were developing strategies to manage the unwanted attention, Emma spiked a dangerous fever that sent Marcus into panic mode. Emergency room, immediate admission, bacterial meningitis, life-threatening and requiring intensive treatment that Marcus's minimal health insurance would barely touch. The financial reality hit like a physical blow. $180,000 for the complete treatment protocol, specialized medications, extended ICU monitoring. His insurance would cover perhaps 40%, leaving a debt that would financially destroy him regardless of how many additional shifts he worked. Victoria appeared at the hospital with her checkbook and a team of medical consultants, treating Emma's life-saving care like a minor problem she could solve with a phone call to her bank. "This is ridiculous," she said after their third argument about money in as many days, her composure finally cracking under the stress of watching them both suffer unnecessarily. "Emma needs immediate treatment. I have unlimited resources to provide that care without any financial strain whatsoever. Why are you making this situation more complicated than necessary? Because I cannot be the man who dates a billionaire so she can solve all his problems with her bank account," Marcus replied, his voice raw with exhaustion from days at Emma's bedside. "That makes me financially dependent rather than an equal partner in this relationship." "You think I'm going to leave?" Victoria said, sudden understanding replacing her frustration. "You think this relationship is temporary, that I'm experimenting with normal life before returning to my real world? That's what this is actually about, isn't it? Not pride about money, but fear that I'm not genuinely committed to building something permanent." "Everyone leaves eventually," Marcus said, the words emerging raw and honest from places he tried to protect. "Claire left me alone with a 4-year-old and medical bills I couldn't manage. She left through death rather than choice, but she still left. My parents left when they decided they couldn't handle helping raise a granddaughter. Everyone abandons ship when life gets genuinely difficult. Victoria, why would you be any different?" "Because I love you," Victoria replied simply, moving close enough to take his hands despite his resistance. "Both of you. And love means staying precisely when things become most difficult." As Emma's condition worsened and Marcus's resistance finally crumbled under the weight of desperation and exhaustion, he whispered, "Okay, help us. Please. I can't handle this alone anymore." Victoria held him as he finally allowed himself to break down completely, admitting that single parenthood was overwhelming, that medical crises exceeded his capacity to manage, that needing help wasn't weakness but recognition of human limitations. Emma's recovery was gradual but complete, her young body responding well to treatment that Victoria's financial intervention had made possible. The medical bills that would have crushed Marcus became merely another entry in Victoria's charitable giving, substantial but manageable for someone with her resources. During Emma's hospital stay, their relationship deepened in ways that crisis and vulnerability often facilitate. They worked together around the clock, taking shifts monitoring Emma's progress, supporting each other through the exhaustion and fear that serious childhood illness brings to any parent. Everything changed during Emma's final week of recovery when a cardiac emergency erupted in the hospital hallway outside her room. Code blue. An elderly patient had collapsed, his heart stopping while family members screamed for help. Hospital staff rushed toward the commotion, but Marcus was closer. Without conscious thought, his hands moved with precision that shocked everyone present. Advanced cardiac massage, perfect rhythm, textbook technique that most EMTs couldn't perform with such expertise. Within minutes, the patient's pulse returned. His color improved. His breathing stabilized. Hospital personnel stared in amazement. "Dr. Cross," whispered a nurse who'd been working there for 15 years. "We all thought you were... We heard you'd left medicine completely." Victoria's eyes widened with comprehension and something approaching awe as pieces of Marcus's carefully hidden puzzle finally clicked into place. That evening, with Emma sleeping peacefully and crisis finally behind them, Marcus told Victoria the complete truth he'd been hiding since their first dinner. He had been Dr. Marcus Cross, cardiac surgeon, rising star in his field, the youngest physician ever to perform certain experimental procedures. His hands had saved hundreds of lives before his 28th birthday. The medical journals Victoria might find would describe groundbreaking techniques he'd pioneered, innovations that had revolutionized cardiac care. But the night Claire died, he'd been operating on another patient when she coded in the emergency room 3 floors below. Protocol demanded he complete his current surgery, a child whose life hung in the balance. But by the time he reached Claire, it was too late. She died while he was saving someone else's child, leaving him with guilt so profound that he'd never been able to hold a scalpel again. The media attention, the malpractice lawsuit, though he was ultimately cleared, the whispered speculation about whether his judgment had been compromised by personal crisis, all of it had destroyed his confidence and his career simultaneously. I became a rideshare driver because I thought I didn't deserve to save lives anymore, Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face. Every time I used medical skills, it reminded me that I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. Victoria took his hands, her own eyes filled with tears. But you saved mine, and you've been saving Emma's life every single day just by being the father she needs. Claire's death wasn't your fault, Marcus. You were being a doctor, making impossible choices that doctors have to make. She would have understood that better than anyone. 6 months after Emma's complete recovery, they stood together at an elegant charity gala Victoria had organized specifically to benefit children's medical research. Emma's story, her recovery, and the foundation that grew from her experience had inspired donors to contribute millions toward research that would help other families facing similar medical crises. The evening was perfect, filled with hope and possibility, and the kind of meaningful celebration that Victoria had never experienced in her previous life of corporate achievements and empty social obligations. Marcus had spent weeks planning this moment, the small velvet box hidden in his jacket pocket, containing a ring purchased with 3 months of carefully saved tips and extra shifts. Nothing approaching what Victoria could afford, but representing something more valuable than money could ever measure. But as he reached for that box, preparing to kneel before the woman who had taught him to trust again, Victoria suddenly knelt before him. "Marcus Cross," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed ballroom as conversation stopped, and hundreds of people turned to witness something unprecedented. She produced not one, but 2 velvet boxes from her purse. "You gave me the breath of life that night in the alley. Will you let me give you and Emma a lifetime of love in return?" The proposal was for both of them. An engagement ring for Marcus, a promise ring for Emma. The symbolism was perfect. A family choosing each other completely, no one left out or uncertain about their place in this new configuration. "Yes," Marcus whispered, then louder. "Yes to everything." Emma squealed with delight, throwing her arms around both adults as the ballroom erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, but this time the attention felt celebratory rather than intrusive. A love story worth documenting rather than sensationalizing. As they danced together later that evening, Emma tugged on Victoria's designer gown with characteristic 6-year-old determination. "Victoria," she said with the serious tone children use when asking important questions, "how did you know Daddy was the one for you?" Victoria knelt to Emma's eye level, smoothing a strand of hair from the little girl's face with infinite gentleness. "He gave me the breath of life, sweetheart. Literally saved my life with those rescue breaths. But then he taught me what it really means to live, what it means to love someone completely, to build a family, to find purpose beyond just making money or being successful in business." She looked up at Marcus, her eyes bright with tears of pure happiness. "Sometimes the person who saves your life becomes the person you want to build your whole life with. Their wedding 6 months later was elegant but intimate. Emma serving as flower girl, proudly announcing to anyone who would listen that she now had a mommy who saves companies and a daddy who saves people. Victoria stepped back from the daily demands of CEO responsibilities, focusing instead on meaningful work through their newly established medical foundation. Marcus returned to medicine part-time, his skills and confidence gradually returning as he worked with families facing the same medical crises that had once devastated his own life. The rescue that had begun with emergency mouth-to-mouth in a rain-soaked alley had transformed into something far more precious, a love that required no crisis to justify its existence, a family built on mutual rescue rather than individual salvation. As they drove home from their honeymoon, Marcus behind the wheel while Victoria sat beside him and Emma chattered about her new favorite park from the back seat. Victoria reflected on how completely her definition of success had changed. The IPO had been successful, her company continued to thrive, but none of those achievements felt as important as the simple daily miracle of loving and being loved unconditionally. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, noticing her contemplative silence. "Just remembering that night when I asked you to kiss me again," Victoria replied with a smile. "And you insisted it was emergency care, not a kiss." "It was artificial respiration," Marcus protested, though he was smiling too. "Textbook respiratory support designed to maintain oxygen flow to vital organs." "Maybe," Victoria conceded, "but it was also the first breath of our new life together. The moment everything changed for all of us." Emma piped up from the back seat with characteristic 6-year-old wisdom. "You should still kiss every day, though, just to make sure it keeps working." And they did.